Well, here to give us his opinion is Chris Phillips, former senior police officer with particular expertise in counter-terrorism. So, Chris, are we actually going to be safer, really? And is the cost to our private lives really worth it?
Yeah, well, to a great extent there, I completely agree with you, Bev. I don't like the thought of this. However, we also have to be realistic, and the world is changing very quickly. And we've already got ID systems in our pocket. Everyone walking around with a mobile phone has everything on them that can identify them, where they've been, what they do, what they've been doing, who they've been talking to, what drugs they're taking, etc., etc. So I'm probably not quite as worried about it as you are.
It's
However,
completely different.
I don't like the idea. Sorry?
It's completely different. And this is what I think, there's a huge misunderstanding about this today. And I put on Twitter and I put out there, give me a list of what's wrong with centralised digital ID. And a lot of people came back and said, I don't really understand it. I don't really understand how this is going to change my life. One way they're going to sell this to us, Chris, and this is your area of expertise, is about safety. This is for your safety. How? Just explain to us why having our life on our phone, which is what it will be, it won't be an ID card you carry in your pocket anymore. It will have all of our information. So at the moment, our shopping history is in one area, our NHS information is in another, our tax is in another, our NHS details are in another. But this is about putting it all together in one easily accessible place, potentially with conditions attached to go about normal life. Is that going to be safer? I don't feel that makes us safer. I think that makes me more vulnerable.
I think you're right, exactly. But there are circumstances, of course, where we have people who, A, work in the black economy, A, don't want to be identified. And we've got an awful lot of people that are in our country that shouldn't be here for one reason or another. So, from a policing perspective, which is not what you want to hear, really, I can see some benefits in this identifying very, very bad people and what they're up to. But I really don't like the whole concept of this. And in particular, this is a movement towards this digital money as well, which I think is a very difficult situation. And I think people need to work out where we're going to go with this, because there are, of course, the issues that we're going to face over the coming generation with AI and what that means for humankind. I think there's, this is a big picture thing that we all need to understand more about.
It really is. I mean, in terms of terrorism as well, of course, what I always say to people about digital ID, imagine the politician that you least like. Imagine the politician that winds you up the most, and imagine them being in charge of the government and being able to decide what you can and can't do, what you can and can't buy, where you can and can't go, who you can and can't see, based on their idea of what is a security risk. Now, in the last 3 years, a lot of us had our parameters challenged in terms of what we would do which was outside of the law, whether that was meeting up with your mother on a park bench when you weren't actually allowed to, or having some teenagers in the garden having a few beers. It was a time for people who are normally very good and law-abiding like me to stretch those boundaries. Now, you put somebody in charge of this digital ID system who has boundaries which you don't agree with, we can have our lives literally turned off at the flick of a switch. And so I don't feel it's going to make me any safer. Like I say, I feel it's going to make us much more vulnerable. And in terms of the terrorism angle, Chris, let me just ask you, for instance, the Manchester Arena bombers, they were born here. They would have already had their digital ID. It wouldn't have stopped an attack like that, would it?
No, it really wouldn't have done. What we do have to bear in mind, though, is that there are some people that do need to be put under surveillance, and he would have been one of them. And, of course, this would help that. But, I think we're on the same side here, really, Bev. But there are some benefits in the policing perspective, in the tax perspective, in the control of government. But you're quite right. How much power are we as individuals going to give over to government and to policing, etc., to supposedly keep us safe? But I think this whole AI thing needs real consideration as well,
Yeah.
because we are going to be doing things differently over the next few years. And the one thing I would say to you is that people of my generation are much less likely to want to have digital IDs than some of the young people who don't seem to worry too much about giving information out and giving their ID out to the world through their computer and their phones.
You can guarantee that as we talk, there'll be a basement somewhere in the UK, potentially with a gang of Albanians in it, working out how they're going to hack the system. Because if you've got all of your information in one place, that must render you more vulnerable to identification theft, to somebody being able to access your money. And this is where my knowledge dries up, OK? I'm no expert in terms of how easy it is going to be to hack these things. But we've been living in a time where we had to shred our bank statements before we put them in the bin or anything, because digital and identity theft was so easy. It's got easier as we've gone more online. We're more liable to be scammed. We're more liable to have details of ours taken and used in nefarious ways. Tony Blair, of course, like you say, was getting very excited today about AI, and William Hague. They love this. There's sort of like there's a type of technocratically minded man at the moment, Chris, who is just so excited to see these measures being forced through at a rate of knots that I just don't think the British public are ready for. Let me cast your mind back. Let me tap into your experience then as an officer of the law for many years. You can probably remember, I can just about remember, some of the debates around ID cards, because we've always been a country that pushed right back. Can you remember some of the arguments that were used at the time for why we didn't need ID cards?
Yeah, well, I mean, there are lots of ways that we have identification, aren't there? There's very few of us that couldn't easily be identified. The people that don't want to be identified are a different matter altogether. And just take you to a slightly different thing as well, is that crime is now enormous. It's big business. And you're quite right to say that that criminals will be looking at this immediately as a means of making money. And they're doing that already. And of course, any form of ID can be used by other people that for criminal purposes.
Yeah, absolutely. Criminals are looking at this in how to make money. I saw Tony Blair, he's one of them. He was announcing it this morning. I don't trust him as far as I can throw him. There's no doubt that him and all his mates are going to profit. There is profits to be made in this. And this is before we've even talked about it being tied to your health status and whether you've had too many calories that week, whether you've spent too much. And as you say, it will be tied to a centralised banking digital currency, and then life as we know it is over. Chris, I can't have you here without asking you one quick question about the Shamima Begum trial today. Do you think it was the right decision for her not to have her citizenship reinstated?
Yeah, absolutely. She is a danger. She's been a danger. She did it all quite willingly. The people that are victims, she's been made out to be a victim in all this. The victims are actually the Yazidis that were put into slaves, and all the people that were murdered by her and her friends and colleagues in ISIS. She's a criminal. We don't need her back in this country.
Yeah, we got enough of those already. Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much. Former Head of National Counter-Terrorism Security Office, Chris Phillips there.